Well, thank you very much. I apologize for the delay in getting going. I was up at the Senate caucus visiting with the members, and we've had meetings with the Speaker and the Pro Tem today and various members of the legislature to talk about the future of the state of Oklahoma and how we can put our state on a path that is more prosperous and has a more prosperous future. We all know that Oklahoma families are struggling. Businesses have had a tough go with the downturn in the energy sector that has lasted much longer, almost close to 2 years, longer than anyone ever thought it would. Certainly the state revenues of the state have suffered, and we've had even further declines after we initially announced our state budget back in February. We've had 2 revenue failures since that time, and the budget hole grew from $900 million to $1.3 billion. We know that there are businesses that are having job layoffs and certainly state agencies that are feeling the impact and wondering what their future holds as far as the delivery of essential state services to the state of Oklahoma. When I gave my State of the State speech back at the beginning of February, I laid forth various ideas of how we could put recurring revenue on the table and back into the baseline of the state budget for the legislators to be able to consider to fund various core services of state government. I also outlined various sources of revenue, whether it was looking at revolving funds, looking at sales tax exemptions, looking at incentives, looking at cash reserve, looking at revolving funds, all those different sources of revenue that we could consider putting back into, once again, the baseline because of our money that we receive as a state, because so much money is taken off the top, and you might remember I showed a graph showing that we have about $8 billion taken off the top of our revenue collections, that the legislature's left with about 45 cents of every $1 to be able to make a decision about where they're going to spend that money. Certainly this is a very difficult year, and we're having to make a lot of tough decisions. And I challenged the legislature and asked them to work with me to roll up their sleeves, do the hard work, get into the details of the state budget, the needs of the state agencies, while also making sure that we maintain a strong, vibrant, pro-business economy in the state of Oklahoma. There's been questions. Certainly we're in our 11th week of the 11th week of our legislative session. We have about 6 weeks left to go before the session's ends about what type of work is being done to fill the $1.3 billion budget gap. I want you to know, and I think it's important for the public to know, that the House and the Senate has been working extremely hard behind the scenes, meeting constantly on the state budget. They've divided up into different working groups, looking at sales tax incentives, sales tax exemptions, revolving funds, carryover funds, pass-through funds, whatever it might be, to look at all the different revenue sources and how we could better structure our state budget so that we don't have budget holes and gaps that are artificially created because of so much money that are taken off the top, per se, as I've been talking about, and put the state on a more solid, sound foundation going into future generations, not only for future generations of Oklahomans, but future generations of governors that will come after I leave in a couple of years. I also talked to the legislature during my State of the State speech about priorities of the state, and I think it's important that the public understand that my speech, and I think with the House and the Senate they agree with this, that the priorities are that we want to fund education at the appropriate levels. It is unacceptable to have 4-day-week school days in education. We want to make sure that every child has the best education possible, and it's also very important that we have a highly skilled, educated workforce in our state to not only retain jobs, but to attract jobs in our state. Public safety is certainly a huge priority, making sure that our communities are safe, our citizens are safe, our businesses are protected, We've had a lot of discussion about criminal justice issues, prison overcrowding, correction officers and lack thereof, and how we got to do a better job in our corrections systems in the state of Oklahoma. We've made great progress in our transportation across the state, and we've been able to cut our structurally deficient bridges by 1/2 over the past 5 years, but there's still a lot of needs in transportation infrastructure needs in our state, and that is certainly something that we don't want to regress in the progress that we've made. Health and Human Services is another huge concern, and it was a top line priority in my budget, making sure that we take care of those that are most vulnerable in our state, whether it is children who are at risk and families in foster care and the DHS system, working with the Pinnacle Plan, or whether it is our seniors in our nursing homes to those who are on Medicaid, and making sure that we don't have the disastrous type of cuts that we could see if we don't get our work done here at the Capitol when it comes to Medicaid cuts, as some have suggested might have to be 25% in light of the current revenue shortfalls that we've been experiencing. And so we've been working very, very hard, maybe not in public town hall meetings per se, but I can guarantee you that we probably spend 50% of my time on the state budget and the different issues that we're dealing with. I know that the Secretary of Finance, President Dorflinger, and the chairmen of the Appropriations Committee and their committee members meet 1 to 2 to 3 times, sometimes a day, and certainly a week, in discussing various options. The House has different things that they're looking at to fund the critical needs of the state, areas that we obviously are going to have to take a cut in spending in our various state agencies. We're looking at revenue ways to move money off the top down to the bottom to put more into the base of the budget so I can allocate it to important services. The Senate has different ideas that we've been meeting and discussing on. They've had different groups meeting. The House has had 9 different working groups. The Senate has many different working groups too. And I will say that this is probably the first time in my 5 years as governor that I've seen as many House and Senate members engaged and truly looking at the services of our state and the finances of our state and really getting involved in how we allocate our money and what our priorities should be, and making sure that we're putting money towards things that we not just hope work, but things that we know will work, that will really truly make a difference in education, public safety, transportation, health and human services, those type of top-line priorities and core services for our state. It's not an easy job. It certainly requires a lot of tough decisions to be made, but it's critical to Oklahoma's future that we make those tough decisions, that we finish our work, and we will finish our work here at the Capitol. I know that we're in agreement on many different issues when it comes to funding. There are still some issues that we don't have agreement on, but I thought it was important to give the public the assurance that they're working very, very hard, as well as all the people in the various agencies, to make sure that we tighten our belts, that we find efficiencies, just like family households, just like businesses are having to do in this challenging economy. We will get through it. We've been through this before. And looking back at decades of Oklahoma, when we've gone through downturns economically in our state, we think this may be one of the worst downturns we've gone through since possibly even before the 80s, maybe back to the 60s. It's very challenging, certainly for all of us. But you got smart people, dedicated people, certainly a lot of needs out there, and a path forward. I think we do have a path forward. So the last couple of days, I asked Secretary Dorflinger to find a way that we might be able to structure a path forward for the legislature to be able to come into agreement on key different issues and to start putting some working documents together. We have a document I think all of you had. It's a draft only. In fact, that's one of the things that we wanted to share with the House and the Senate, which we did yesterday. But it is truly a working list of ideas. It is not the budget, but when I put my budget out in February of this year, we had a $900 million shortfall. Now we have a $1.3 billion shortfall. And so I thought it was wise for us to continue to show paths forward for the state to be able to fund these core services without causing as much harm, the least harm per se, to these different core services that we want to make sure that we provide for our citizens. So, as you all know, it's a three-legged stool here at the legislature. You have the House, you have the Senate, and you have the governor. There has to be an agreement on these different revenue sources, on the different spending priorities of the state, on the different ways that we can put recurring revenue back into the budget. I have given them a list of ideas. They have their own ideas, and we are still currently meeting on these various things. Some of them they'll like, some of them they won't like. I also asked them to bring forth their ideas. Some of them I'll like, some of them I won't like. But in the end, this is how we develop a budget in the state, which usually occurs about the second or last week of session, as we all know. So today was a day just to give you an update that we're trying to find a path forward to get our work done at the Capitol, to be able to fund the important priorities, and to also explain that what we have put out is just a guideline of ideas that they can consider, along with the ideas that the House and Senate's already considering at the time. And then in the end, hopefully over the next several weeks, at least we know by 6 weeks, we're going to have a final decision on what the priorities of the budget will be. So anything else you want to add? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
It looks like this budget will be about 1 or 1.5% smaller than the current budget. If the legislature does an appropriation bill that calls for significantly greater cuts, such that it would possibly endanger the education or health system, would you veto that?
Well, one of the things I've asked the members to consider is that since 2007, if you look every single year, which I have a chart and a graph of all spending in the state, all appropriations of the state in education, corrections, transportation, OJA, disability, tourism, commerce, whatever it might be, that when we went through our recession back in 2008, 2009, 2010, there were big cuts made to spending in many of our key categories. And we have put money back into those things as our economy recovered, beginning in 2012, 2013, 2014. We were able to put more money back into education, about $150 million more dollars, $17 million more dollars back into mental health services. We put more money in for correction officers. We gave some of the state employees a pay raise. We certainly put more money towards roads and bridges and those things. But what I've asked the legislators to consider is that we have to be careful that we don't cut so far to the bone that we're not effective in delivering state services to the state that are important to us, that are core services of the state. Now, we do have a budget shortfall. I've also asked them not to set us up for failure in the future with the budget by creating artificial holes in the budget that we're going to have to deal with in the future to put us on a structurally more sound footing for the state budget, and to consider some of these ideas about recurring revenues and which classification the money goes in. The total spending of the budget itself, when you take local, state, and federal money, is about $24 billion. And so we have money, it's just how it's allocated, and once again, it's 45 cents of the dollar if they're allowed to appropriate because of the structure of the budget itself. But in answer to your question, that's all negotiable. I mean, we've got to find consensus on things, but I have asked them to consider that, we don't want to go to 4-day school weeks, we don't want to have nursing homes closed, we don't want to have rural hospitals closed. We certainly want to keep our highway systems safe and functioning the way it should be, and there are many other different topics I could mention, but once again, it's a negotiation process, it's a moving puzzle, that we still have 6 weeks to go to be able to negotiate these things.
Your handout lists, says these bills free of narrow 1.3 billion. Are any of these in bill format? I mean, do you have bills that are being sponsored to implement these ideas, or is that going to come out of a GA bill, or do you still?
Barbara, what we were trying to provide was just a concept, some ideas of a path forward. You've heard many of the legislators say, well, we can't get 3/4 of a vote to do this, we can't do that. We're not going to be able to do things that we may want to consider, but these are ideas. So we can certainly go through the JCAB bill, certainly through that. But this was intended to be more ideas on top of the ideas I presented during my Say the State speech. A working draft, true draft, because they have their ideas, I have mine. And I invite anybody that's got ideas of how we can help solve some of the state problems to bring them forward, because they're all on the table right now.
What kind of reception did you get when you met with the Senate Republican caucus?
It was a great discussion. We had a discussion about a lot of these different ideas. They shared with me a lot of their ideas. I've met with the speaker several times this week, and I know he's in a caucus right now, or I'd be talking to them. But great reception, because that's what I want to happen. You know, in the years past, people complained that budgets have been done in a back room and not very many people were included in this. I think this is probably the most inclusive year we've ever had, with legislators being highly engaged in discussing the finances of the state, the priorities of the state, and putting many different ideas on the table, concepts on the table of how we can close a large budget gap and make sure that Oklahoma's on a path that's going to be prosperous in the future.
Governor Fallin, a lot of legislators are concerned that we're using the state's credit card to get out of debt. What would be your response to that?
Well, if you look at this sheet, one of the things I've been talking about is fixing the structural issues of the state budget itself. And as I mentioned, we have $24 billion. Actually, when you take all the different revenue sources of the state, we have $8 billion that comes off the top that's apportioned back to different functions of the state of Oklahoma. And then we typically have had about a $7 billion budget, although now the revenue certification is much less than that. And I've also mentioned that 45 cents of every dollar is available through appropriations, because everything's already allocated to something else to begin with. That's the whole concept I'm talking about, is we've got to fix the structure of the budget so that we don't continually have these budget shortfalls with the money that's available for the legislature to be able to appropriate. So I've asked them to look at recurring revenues. It's money that's already there. Revolving funds, it's money that replenishes every year. We classify them where they really belong. To look at some of our tax exemptions, some of our tax incentives, tax credits. I mean, that's all fair game. We want to certainly have incentives on the books that helps us attract investment, attracts jobs, which we've been very successful at, and that's important to the business community. In fact, I'll tell you that last night I was in Tulsa, and I was meeting with the Tulsa Chamber and a group of business people, and they had a national site locator for businesses that works with Fortune 500 companies and looking at states and which are the best states to go to. And a couple things that he told the crowd in Tulsa was that people look for a highly skilled, educated workforce. They look at degree completion within the workforce itself. They certainly look at incentives, because it's a very competitive environment that we operate in nationally. They certainly look at healthcare services. People don't want to take jobs to a community where they don't have healthcare services, or they don't have primary care physicians. They don't have maybe a hospital that's closed or getting ready to close. They certainly want to have safety in their communities. They want to have good transportation structures. He mentioned that very specifically, Secretary Ridley, that roads and bridges are very important when it comes to economic development, job recruitment, job retention. And one of the things I don't want to do is see Oklahoma move backwards on some of the progress that we've already made on so many of these key issues.
What are the odds that teachers are going to get a raise in your budget?
Well, this sheet does not outline a teacher pay raise. I said in my State of the State speech that I do want to give teachers a pay raise. There actually are separate issues that we're discussing between the House and the Senate on how we can help better fund and retain our teachers in the state of Oklahoma. So that's a separate issue. It's ongoing discussion. Certainly, there's the Bourne proposal, which raises the state sales tax to the highest rate in the nation. That's a concern, frankly, to municipalities. It's a concern to the Commerce Department and putting us in that top category. But I think we're all in agreement that we want to make sure that we retain our teachers, that we're able to help them with a pay raise. And we're frankly discussing some things in our caucuses and our meetings that would be an alternative to that.
How much in bonding does your proposal contain, municipal roads?
Well, one of the things we've been looking at and suggesting to the House and the Senate is looking at some bonding, and that's always subject to negotiation and subject to debate upon what's the appropriate amount of bonding. But the one thing is I've told the House and Senate, and certainly told the public in my State of the State speech, that 40% of our bond debt comes off the books by 2018, which gives us a lot of capacity to utilize some bonding within a reasonable amount for roads and bridges, for finishing the Capitol. And one of the things that we typically get a demerit for when we go to our rating agencies in New York with Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch is they tell us, you don't take care of your infrastructure in your state and you have such low debt in your state compared to what the national average is, way below that we have capacity and bonding. Now, the one thing we want to be careful about is that we don't create artificial holes in the future, but considering that 40% of our debt comes off the book by 2018, we can structure bond issues certainly to be able to help us through this challenging time, because there will come a time when our economy will recover. There will come a time when the price of oil and gas will come back up. Personal income tax earnings will come back up. Certainly corporate income tax will come back up, and we'll be in a much better position.
Turning to the healthcare budget side, what are your thoughts on the Medicaid rebalancing proposal? And I guess looking back to 2012, do you think it might have been a mistake to reject Medicaid expansion?
Well, I think the public has spoken pretty clearly, and I know the legislators have spoken pretty clearly, that I think the majority of us feel that Obamacare has not worked the way it's supposed to. We've certainly seen our health insurance premiums escalate by huge amounts. We've seen our premiums and costs escalate by huge amounts. It's been very hard on families, very hard on businesses. Medicaid costs have been going up tremendously. People have high deductibles on their health insurance plans, larger copays on their plans. We've seen Congress try to repeal Obamacare many, many times in the U.S. House and in the Senate, and we made a decision not to expand Medicaid in the state. But the one program that we have in the state of Oklahoma has been in existence for over 10 years is called Insure Oklahoma, which a person has a part in paying their premium, has personal responsibility in that. The business pays a portion of it. There's a federal match in that. And it's been a very successful program in the state of Oklahoma, in which we've had waivers for, and I've been successful in the last many years to get that waiver. I feel like we have worked at ways to find a plan that would be the Oklahoma plan per se, that would not do the Medicaid expansion, but would be able to utilize a great resource that we have in our state, which is Insure Oklahoma, to help cover the uninsured in our state, and also help relieve the hospitals that have uncompensated care, because more people have insurance coverage through Insure Oklahoma. So there's been a plan that we've been working on for a couple of years that would require some waivers and other very many moving parts, called the Rebalancing Act for Medicaid. It would require some funding sources to be able to match some federal money that would come through that to use the Insure Oklahoma. And that is still up for debate, but I do hope that the House and Senate will consider that, because it is a way that we can help with our rural hospitals to keep them open in our state. It's a way that we can help from having the 25% provider cuts and losing some of our medical services in our state. I think it would be very helpful, plus reduce the uninsured population, and for those who are eligible to go into the Affordable Health Care Act on their own, would be able to go into that.
Having to do with the, does include the cigarette sales tax increase all.
Well, that is one of the possible funding sources for the Medicaid Rebalancing Act is a cigarette sales tax increase. There was a poll out just yesterday, I think it was, the day before, showing that it's a very acceptable way of being able to fund medical services in the state of Oklahoma and to get more coverage, and plus to reduce our smoking rates in our state and improve the health, frankly. It's about improving health in Oklahoma and saving taxpayers money by increasing the cost of cigarettes, because it does cause people factually and statistically to lower the rates of smoking. We've had one of the highest smoking rates in the nation. It's come down, frankly, over the last 5 years by 19%, so it's had the effect I want it to have. And I put out several proposals banning smoking in public places and certainly in our schools and things like that. So it's a topic I've been working on to improve the health and our health rankings. Typically, Oklahoma's been ranked 49th in the nation in health outcomes. We've been able to lower that to 46th in the nation in health outcomes, but we've got to do better with the health of our citizens. So that is one of the sources that I proposed as a way to improve health, to put more funding towards medical services in our state, and certainly to reduce smoking, which is the #1 preventable cause of death in Oklahoma.
So you fully support the rebalancing proposal with the tobacco tax funding it?
That is one of the sources that's being considered, but it will not be able to fund that solely through the tobacco tax. But it is one of the sources. And like I said, it's all up for negotiation, consideration. There's lots of different ideas that are being floated out there.
But you support that idea, right?
I've supported the cigarette tax increase, absolutely. That was.
Balancing funded through the tobacco tax?
I do support that as one of the funding sources, yes. It's one of the funding sources.
That tax also be used to reduce Medicaid provider cuts.
Could be. Be helpful. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Maybe one more.
Okay.
Maybe one more question.
There's $450 million in bonds for roads, and 120, I think, are suggested for the capital. So you're up to almost $600 million in bond debt. Is that a
120 doesn't
responsible way forward, particularly since
18.
you're talking about not using one-time money?
Well, Rick, the 120 on the capital bond issue wouldn't take effect until 2018. And as I mentioned, 40% of our bond debt comes off in 2018. So there's going to be a lot of freed up money during that time, a lot of capacity freed up during that time. This is an unusual circumstance. As I mentioned, we haven't seen a revenue failure and a prolonged collapse of the energy sector that's lasted just right under 2 years since the 1960s, this magnitude that has affected our state budget. And so this is a different time for our state. But what I do know is that I want to make sure that we fund our schools, that we fund health care, that we fund corrections, fund transportation, fund health and human services, and the important priorities for our state, and that we throw out all ideas. As I mentioned, this is still a work in progress. I'm just throwing out ideas, just like I did in my State of the State speech. It doesn't mean they're going to adopt them all. I don't expect that they will. There'll be some things they propose I like, and some things I propose they don't like. You just have to all work together. But the main thing I wanted to do today was to assure the public that we know there are people in the state of Oklahoma that are worried about jobs. There are businesses that have taken hits because of the energy sector downturn. About 1 in every 5 to 6 jobs is some relation to an energy sector company, whether directly or indirectly. Certainly there are state agencies, there's education and schools trying to do contracts right now, wondering how much money they're going to have going into the fall. But my goal today was just to say there's a huge amount of work going on between the House and the Senate, and frankly to tell them I appreciate them for being so involved this year to a level that we hadn't even seen in the past. And I think that's commendable. So thank you very much.